This is an impromptu video brought on by the results that you see before you. Apologies for the whistling sound in the background, that's the computer's fans, but I need it to be on in order to see the screen while I speak. And this is only semi-scripted, so apologies if it's not as concise as usual and a bit with more pauses and rambling. But these are the votes results for Breed-Smith's abortion bill. Essentially, this was to get rid of a 3-day waiting period between the first consultation and then the actual abortion procedure, as to get rid of it and therefore make abortion easier to get. So here are the votes in favour: Sinn Féin 32, Green Party 10, Independents 7, Social Democrats 6, Labour 6, People Before Profit 5, Fine Gael 1. 67 in total. Votes against: Fianna Fáil 25, Fine Gael 27, Independents 11, Aontú 1. Abstentions: Fianna Fáil 5, Fine Gael 1, Green 1. No vote recorded: Independents 7, Fianna Fáil 6, Fine Gael 4, Labour, well, it's 1, it says 6. Better just check the rest are okay. Yep. Kincarla 1, Sinn Féin 4. And I think that there's something quite revealing about this in terms of both how the left votes and acts, and then how the right lets them do it. So here we see Sinn Féin, there's 32 people voting. There's 4 not there, they can't vote. No abstentions, and they all vote the same way. Green Party, there's 10 people present. They all vote for. Sorry, there's 11 present. 10 for, none against, 1 abstention. Independents, well, they could go either way, but Social Democrats, 6 for, none against, none abstain. And in fact, none are not present, so they all showed up and they all voted the same way. Labour, same story. 6 vote for, none vote against, none abstain, and only 1 is missing. And People Before Profit, there's 5 votes for, none against, no abstentions, and nobody missing. And this is something that we see often. The left wing, when there's a vote, they all show up, or almost all of them, and they all vote the same way. There's never any defections, and there's never any abstentions, or at least hardly ever. Green Party, a 10 out of 11 in this case. Whereas if we consider the parties that claim not to be the left wing, which in this case is the government, right? So we see 25 against, none for, so that seems pretty good. But then we see 5 abstentions. So these people were there, they could have voted, they didn't. 5 of them, and they lost by 3 votes. Fine Gael, possibly worse, 27 against, 1 of them for, so that cancels out 1 vote, and 1 abstention. So if we consider that one Fine Gael person, if they just voted with their party, it would have been 65-66. And Fianna Fáil had 5 people waiting in the wings. They also had 6 people who didn't show up, and 4 people for Fine Gael who didn't show up. And the thing about it is, these parties must know that this is how the left wing does it. They all show up and they all vote the same way. Therefore, if you plan to beat them, you must all show up and you must all vote the same way. And yet we've got people voting the other way, or they're not voting at all. And basically, I think this is the plan. So when come the next election, they will say to all their pro-choice voters that under their government this was passed. To all their pro-life voters, they'll say that they voted against it. But they didn't really, because they had their chance to beat it and they didn't. But this is symptomatic of the difference between left and right-wing voting. It's about basically not delivering what you promise. See, in an election, you promise to do something, and I vote for you. So that's the transaction, my vote in favour for you doing it. If you do it, then you no longer need my vote, and so that I will not necessarily vote for you next time. Whereas if it remains undone, then you can come back to me next time and promise to do it again. And we see that with the Tories in the UK on immigration. They keep promising to lower it. They keep getting votes on that basis, and so they never lower it, so they can keep promising it again and again. We also saw in America recently what happens when you do achieve what you set out to do. I've heard some people say that the Americans in their 2022 midterms, the Republicans were actually hurt because they got rid of Roe versus Wade. For years and years, they could always promise to do something about it, so people voted for them. So then when something finally was done, there was no more need to vote, and people didn't vote. That's one thing I've heard anyway. And so we see it here. These parties are positioning themselves to be against these parties, and all they had to do was all vote and they would have done it. But rather than do that and then have it done, at least for this case, or have it do it again in future, they leave it undone so they can promise to do it next time, always next time. In general, conservatives have this problem because I'm not saying that they're conservative, but they're ostensibly not these people. So they're theoretically conservative. And the problem is that if you're a progressive, there's no limit to what you can promise. When he was the Minister for Health, Enoch Powell wrote, I think, a pamphlet, and he said that there were some words to the effect that there was a fantasy that there was a set level of healthcare that people need. And if you could just provide that level of healthcare, that would be the issue done and dusted. There's always more healthcare that you can provide. There's always more that people need. So no matter how much you provide, you always have to provide more, or at least try to. Whereas, if you were against something like a conservative and you decided, no, we're just going to cut healthcare, well, there's only so much of it provided, so if you just keep cutting it, eventually there won't be any left. And so the problem that these parties have is that they've got real measurable things that they can do, and they're trying desperately not to ever get there. They can't milk their objectives in the same way that these people can, because their objectives are general and vague and they're always moving. Whereas their objectives would be quite specific and you do reach an end point. So the only way to milk them is never to do them. And I think here we see an example of it. That they'll come back and they'll say that you'll vote for them to stop these people getting their way. And yet when it came down to a vote, these people got their way because they stood aside and let them do it with these abstentions. But from nationalists' perspective, this may possibly present an opportunity. So in this particular vote, the margin was 3 votes. Suppose there were 3 nationalist-leaning independents, or 3 members of the National Party, or some future far-right TDs in power, and there were 3 or 4 of them, or even 1 or 2. That could be pretty important if the margin is only 3 votes. And so there's a disproportionate amount of power that such a small group could wield on important votes like this. So that's just maybe possibly an opportunity. The other opportunity is actually an extension of what we actually see here. So they're going to claim that they're going to fight against these people, the left. That's left wing, that's left wing, that's left wing, that's left wing, that's left wing. Some of these people are left wing. So they'll promise to fight against them, but they never really will, because the votes are in the promise, not in the fight, and certainly not in the win. But suppose you got some nationalists or far-right people in, well, then they'll promise to fight the far-right, and therefore they never really will, because once you've fought them, you're done with the fight. So that's another thing, this kind of mentality, and possibly they will adopt the same mentality. That if it's their job to fight the far right, then the absolute last thing they're going to want to do is actually beat them, because then the fight will be over. So that's a possible opportunity waiting in the future, just from the psychology of the incentives of parliamentary politics. So these narrow votes are an opportunity, and just the incentive never to actually fix the problem you're trying to fight. That could be an opportunity when the far right is the problem, or rather nationalists are the problem. So I was just prompted by these results because I just thought that it really summed up a number of things I've been thinking about politics, and it's right there in really these numbers. And that was a defeat from the jaws of victory, and done on purpose.